Yeah. Good afternoon. On behalf of byBrick, we want to welcome everyone on the call. My name is Morten Stender, and I work as director for our business transformation. And this afternoon, I'm happy to introduce one of our favorite customers, PageGroup. PageGroup is a global specialist recruitment organization. They are headquartered out of London, where the IT has taken, I would say, a remarkable journey towards a more centralized governance with increased focus on the strategy execution, aggregated views, and with good insight to the portfolio management. So I'm really happy to introduce our guest speaker today, which is Mike Daley. And he's a global chief architect for PageGroup. And he has led the journey of, should we say, lifting the projects department by providing grounding EA work. Before I hand over to Mike, just some practical stuff. If you have questions, please use the chat options on the screen in the lower right corner, and we will collect questions to the end of the webinar. And then we target that the session will take about half an hour. So we will finalize with a couple of questions. So Mike, please, my warm welcome.
Thank you very much, Morten, and good afternoon, everybody, assuming that it's afternoon in your time zone. My name is Mike Daley. I'm the chief architect at PageGroup. That's a global role which covers the entirety of the PageGroup business. That's about 5,500 people in 35 countries, working out of just short of 150 offices. We're a specialist recruitment agency dealing with clerical professionals, so financial services is a strong specialism of ours, but diversifying increasingly into many other sectors, right the way up to our Page Executive business, which covers the most senior roles in business. And it's my joy to be here with byBrick today to share with you a little bit of the journey that architecture has gone through and that the PMO has gone through at PageGroup since I've been there, which is about 3 years. Now, it's traditional in these conversations to start with a disaster slide and say, oh, look how terrible everything was. So here is mine. And of course, those of you who have any experience in modeling will probably tell me that this actually isn't a disaster at all. It's a set of deeply contemplated and highly well-developed models, thoroughly denormalized, entirely appropriately categorized. But it represents the state of the art in the architecture sphere at PageGroup when I joined. Now, there's nothing intrinsically wrong with this. The team at the time were doing that job right and well. In my opinion, however, they were slightly doing the wrong job. So being drawn into this level of precision, as opposed to being actually accurate and relevant, meant that that team had drawn away from people and it had drawn away from communication. And so I tell you this so you understand a little bit of the context of the journey that PageGroup's been through, the PageGroup IT has been through over the last while, and why we made the decisions we did. And I hope that story plays out for you smoothly through this. If it doesn't, please do let me have some questions at the end and I will do my best to explain. So my opinion of architecture as I joined was that although it was technically good, it was unavailable to people. It was actually distracting, and it only gave the illusion of control to the architecture team, who had less impact on the project portfolio than they should have done. And as a result, EA was seen as somewhere up in the air, and the PMO were very much only down on the ground. And that made it very difficult to get the two groups to work together properly. So we had a target date for delivery of a front office system, no option but to meet that date. And therefore, I used that as the crisis that everybody should try and have, whether they really have one or not. Emergency architecture was what I called it, to move us forward as fast as we could. And so the first steps I took at Page were first off to archive everything we had before. And that was a little bit of subterfuge on my part. What I did was to keep that archived so that everybody felt safe, so there were no concerns, but also so that that archive was not accessible every day. And it put the old beyond use, if you like, to borrow a term. And as we rebooted, we needed to pick the key characteristics we needed to see in the architecture. And the three that really drove us, and we selected these as a team, were to be simple, to be relevant, and to be urgent. And that's really important, not just because those are good things in any event, but also because they fought strongly back against the stereotype of what architects did. Because architects, I think, are seen, if people don't reflect, as being maybe a little bit complicated, perhaps a little bit too abstract to mean anything, and definitely not being suitable for bringing anywhere near a project delivery timeline. So to achieve all of this wonderful stuff, it sounds great, Mike. Now, how are you going to do it? What we decided to do was, first off, to establish in the architecture the concept of a minimum viable data set. And we borrowed that from the startup world, where they talk about the minimum viable product. You know, what's the least you can do and go to market? And in our case, it was, what is the smallest amount of data we can gather and still have adequate control and adequate understanding of the environment? The other reason to do that was because the architecture team is small and the project delivery organization is large. And that means that I need architecture to be a force multiplier, if you like, to help my 2 or 3 people, help the other 40 or 50 or 400 people, however many it is, it wasn't that many, to do the right thing. And that's my point. Again, to gather that minimum viable data set, I saw it as vital that we went out and engaged with teams for those data, because if we didn't, then it was just divorced from reality, and that's bad. So that was an excuse to go and talk to people. It was an excuse to make friendships and to start to join the organization up. And as part of that, we were able to keep on a very short feedback loop. So we were able to course correct if we went wrong. And in terms of what we used for IT support at that stage, keep it as simple as possible. We used Office. And one of my team was a little bit fond of D3, so we have a bit of D3JS as well. And what that looked like was this. So these are the core artifacts that guided that very first implementation, and they are exactly what we needed and no more. So you can see an activity framework at the top right. That's the very basis of a decent process decomposition at a very high level, with some basic mapping through to data. At the top right, we have the basic component diagram that says, well, what are the pieces of this system? How are they integrated? Where are they located? Again, not a formal UML artifact, but certainly something people found comprehensible and visually appealing. At the bottom right, one of a series of mappings that said, and this function is implemented by this component, and this data is stored here, and this service is delivered by this component. And at the bottom left, our services wheel. Now, this represents all of the technology services that PageGroup IT offers to the operation and to itself, covering both applications and infrastructure. You read it from the center out. So it's a 4-level decomposition going from the center out. We absolutely loved this starburst chart. It's done us huge favors in PR terms because people see it as circular and therefore complete. It makes use of a sort of a heuristic people have where they judge things that look finished as being more finished and more reliable. But it also enabled us to do lots of cross-checking and became a constant reference. We have it printed out at A1 in our offices. So that's great. That works. Now we have to start to think about what we do next. And so we then start to have the traditional next set of problems for architects. So the next problems particularly are configuration management. As we roll out across more offices, across more regions, we hit different regulatory environments. We hit different local applications that need to integrate. How do we maintain the consistency of a solution and yet, at the same time, allow ourselves to have it all thoroughly documented in a manageable and controllable way? This became a bit of an issue, and we knew that we were starting to move beyond Office at that point. Of course, you never have one success at a time. We had an additional challenge, which was a good one, actually. We had a new CIO who joined us, a very level-headed chap. But of course, that represents a slight cultural change and somebody else to convince that you're on the right path. And he had two very clear priorities that he brought through that were particularly relevant for architecture. And those were enlightened pragmatism and transparency. Now, transparency, I think, is fairly standard for any leader. They always want to be able to see what's going on, and it's sometimes difficult to get them not just the headline figures, but also insight into why the headline figures are the way they are. And enlightened pragmatism was music to my ears, because so often one hears that pragmatism is good, but doesn't hear the enlightened bit, and that means that people end up making very, very short-range tactical decisions. Enlightened pragmatism is effectively architecture's license to operate. It's what lets me get involved and say, yes, absolutely, that will solve your problem, but it will only solve it for 3 weeks. And after that, you're going to have to do something else. So why don't you do the right thing now? And that's been absolutely key for me. And then for the architecture function itself, for my team, I then set the team the goal that having first established some traction and got people involved and interested, the next thing we needed to do was to consolidate those gains and start to wrap the architecture processes and the delivery processes more closely together, so that the flow of from strategy set at the department level based on the business strategy overall, then fed down into our architectural plans, which then drove project behavior. And I know that's sort of a textbook flow, and everybody believes they have this, at least to some extent, or certainly would like to have it. But joining those things together in a concrete way, a really, really concrete way, was very important. So a lot of what I've tried to bring here is about concreteness, about making it real and tangible and being able to point to something and say, I know why I'm making that decision. It's absolutely key that we be able to do that. Otherwise, the integrity of architecture is lost. I am aiming for a prize, by the way, for the number of times I can say architecture in a single webcast. Let me know if I hit it or not. So with all of those features, we decided it was then time to go and look at the enterprise architecture tooling market. How can I formalize this stuff and help the project delivery organization do the right thing without me being all over them all day, every day? So here's a thing about the market for enterprise architecture tooling. It is full of lemons. It is full of deeply correct, highly formalized tools, which are wonderful for architects. And they are very often terrible for communicating with humans. When you are talking about a very big, long-range strategic development in an absolutely enormous organization, they may well be appropriate. But if you're talking about anything less, and I think the barrier there is really quite high, you are, I think, obliged on behalf of your shareholders, if no one else, to ask yourself if what you are doing is really what is needed, or whether it's a reflexive reaction to an unknown situation. And I wish, by the way, that EA tooling was also 50 euro cents a kilo, because most of it isn't, alas. So my opinion, again, to use another semi-funny slide, I'm afraid, is that this is where a lot of those tools play. They are unwieldy, slightly strange ways for architects to have conversations with themselves. And that's exactly the opposite of what I wanted for my function. I wanted us to be simple, relevant, and urgent. And this is not simple, it is not relevant and urgent. I will let you take a guess what I think. So we mustn't talk to ourselves. This is not what we want to do. It plays into every bad stereotype about architect and architecture. And to just briefly surfing the other day, I sort of ran across the old TOGAF logo of boundaryless information flow. Well, what good is that if I can be TOGAF, perfect, but not actually talk to anybody who isn't already an architect? That is a completely dreadful situation. So we needed to look at something else, and we came to what I call round 2 of our search for appropriate IT support. It was a calmer period for architecture development, so I had a little bit of headroom, not very much, but a little bit, just enough to do some thinking. We had seen some reform in the PMO space. We'd introduced a new group director of projects and programs with heavy experience and a very pragmatic chap and very experienced, so it was great to have him on board. And indeed, we got along very well, which was also particularly useful because, if a door is ajar, it's much easier to open it subsequently. So the opportunity that we saw was effectively to embrace and extend the work that was going on in the PMO space. They were looking to get much better transparency over the project portfolio, much better alignment of the project portfolio. Not that it was terribly bad, but just that as a mostly regionalized organization, trying to have that information presented uniformly and simply at the group level, whilst it was possible, was relatively labor intensive. What I also wanted to do was to use that opportunity to get the groundwork for enterprise architecture in, so that some of it was in my control, if you know what I mean. I was able to start to talk sensibly about how EA and projects interacted. But at the same time, I had to meet an immediate need they had for some support. And that would let me develop an ally for future work. That was really key. I wanted to be on their side. I didn't want to be in my own world and arguing with them, if you like. So we went back out to the markets and had a look at what else was out there, thinking more broadly this time, because really what we'll be doing, we were abstracting the idea and saying, well, we don't necessarily need an enterprise architecture tooling piece. What we need is something that lets us manage that minimum viable data set and lets us share it. That's really at the heart of the architecture endeavor, or at least of the architecture output that you need to guide people. So we put together these criteria to find a solution to delight the boss, which is always wise, and it had to delight me as well, but delighting the boss is always wise. So the first thing is that it had to be fast. We had limited time as ever because no organization has infinite patience. We knew that lots of people had done lots of things and that we wanted to go and find something that accelerated us and helped us hit the ground running, start quickly. And that's pragmatism as far as I'm concerned. Breadth first was the slogan I used to keep my team oriented on being relevant, rather than going deeply into one topic and then trying desperately to catch up with absolutely everything else. Draw back to those minimum data and make them broad. In fact, make them so broad they extend beyond the boundaries of architecture. And that's my point about joined. If you join the data, you join the people. If you join the people, you are having a conversation and you have influence and you can negotiate. You can't do that if you're hermetically sealed. And at the same time, of course, having that minimum consistent data set makes it far easier to give transparency across all activity around the globe. So that was absolutely critical to us. It had to be a flexible solution. I couldn't afford every minor change to be met with a reaction of, oh, possibly that'll take a couple of months to implement. That's very worrying, because then you get the phenomenon that I've heard called landfill requirements, where everybody fills their truck with every requirement they might possibly need out of sheer fear that they'll never have another chance to implement anything. And that, of course, then drives your timescales out and puts you in a vicious circle of getting worse and worse and worse. I didn't want to be there, so it had to be able to adapt readily. Incrementalism was really important, and that's part of the flexible and breadth first part. Yes, that critical minimum viable data set is where we need to start, but we have to move beyond that as well. And we have to be able to increase the amount of data we hold over time, piece by piece, without doing major implementations, because after all, I still have a small team. I still have delivery goals. Even for architecture, I set delivery goals to make sure that we are continuously outputting things of value to our customers and partners. So I wanted to be able to just go, hey, look, it works now. Hey, look, it works now. And keep saying that with more and more functionality over time. And also to make it easy to correct course. I'm not going to guarantee that I'm going to do everything right to start with. I want to be able to say, we can try something, and if it doesn't work, we can row back. And that, again, for me, falls under the transparency banner. It has to be clear. And the reason it had to be clear, well, look at a UML diagram and try to talk to a business analyst about its content. Yes, maybe they can get it. In fact, maybe they are excellent at UML, or maybe they're excellent at Archimate. But those are very clearly technical modeling disciplines. And frankly, they're not very attractive. They're not nice to look at. And they give people mostly the impression that these things are just complicated and difficult. And why are you talking to me about this? Leave me alone. If I can make it attractive in the way I could make the technology service wheel that you saw earlier attractive, people are drawn to it and think, oh, okay, yes, that might be useful. And that's genuinely a cognitive bias people have. They do think that if it's easier to read and easier to understand, they automatically assign it a higher truth value unconsciously. And it had to be agreed. So again, it has to be entered in partnership. The old saying, keep your friends close. I won't fill the rest in. I'm sure you know the rest of it. If you don't, Google it. It's very useful advice. So joining the data meant joining the people. Enabling other people, again, put me in a strong position. and this is where we went searching. And what we found originally was simply the Mood platform, and then through that we found byBrick and their APM accelerator template. Now that for us was absolutely superb, because it gave me a sort of a Meccano kit, if you like, a pre-assembled project management and portfolio management tool that I could offer to the PMO team, that they could take very quick advantage of with minimum tailoring to get a very fast start. But because that template was built on a flexible underlying system, I knew that I would be able over time to expand that appropriately and make sure that it continued to serve our needs into the longer term. And so I'll just take you on a quick journey now through some of the slides that we have, screens that we use in the byBrick tool, some of which are straight out of the template, some of which are variously augmented by us. I'm afraid I've had to do a fairly clumsy job of censoring them, so apologies for the slightly awkward layout in places. Rest assured, it's entirely down to my fault with PowerPoint rather than the tool itself. So first off, this is how we get an overview of our demand management process. So we look to see how many things are awaiting early stage review, how many things are awaiting a planning review to be brought into the full portfolio, and how many things are we actually in the process of doing at the moment. And you can see key metrics there that let us just have a look and see how much money is in each stage of these processes, and how much we have committed, how much activity we have going on in each of the streams. And there are various ways of filtering that, and clicking through on almost everything is a hyperlink, which makes it very simple to get an overview of just what the basic background level of activity is. And that's a really useful at-a-glance check for the PMO team to just see where we are with everything. It's a good sense check. The next thing I'll show you is our proper project portfolio overview. Again, this just gives us a number of cuts of the same data, but done in such a way as to be visually appealing, really straightforward, and it's all linked. So everything is clickable, and I can go through to a particular project from here. I can go through to a particular region's portfolio. I can go through to a particular stage of the demand management process. Again, the numbers and projects are made up. I'm not really running lorem ipsum as a major delivery program, which is what it looks like there. It gives you a sense for how well balanced your portfolio is. It gives you a sense for how fast and how well things are moving through our project pipeline. It gives you a sense of what the regional balance is. Are we doing more projects globally than we're doing in Europe, for example? Is that a good thing? Should we be doing? If we're doing lots of projects in the regions and very little at the group level, is the group adding the right level of value? Should it be doing more? Should it be doing less? Who knows? That's what this is able to tell us. And these are the things we've chosen to overlay on those data. They might be other things for other businesses or other project management groups, but this is what we find useful. And obviously that's customizable. But those views, again, make it really easy to see where you are in the grand scheme of things. Starting to zoom in. Again, I've had to obscure project names, so apologies for that. A nice little overlay of some projects in a particular area over a timeline, coloured by their current status. So you can see that A and B are currently looking very odd because they're in initiate and plan, but they seem to have finished already. And what's going on there? Aren't they terribly behind schedule? The answer is no, they're on hold. For us in this view, that information actually isn't important, and that's why it's not reflected. But had it been, we would absolutely have been able to do that. You can see that C is behind schedule, and yes, that happens in project organizations. It's called prioritizing. D is probably all right, so is H. That's looking okay as well. E and G, if anything, they're doing a bit too well, in fact, and that's just a fact. If you could see the project titles, you would think, oh gosh, that's quite a long project, and so it's appropriate that they are deploying for a good length of time. And that's also driven by other dependencies in the environment that, again, we're increasingly able to analyze as we start to uplift the EA information into here and link it through to the projects. And this is worth bringing out just because this is actually sort of part of the business case for us. Reporting on projects and project trends was actually quite tough. I think project managers never enjoy reporting, even though they all know they have to do it. And it was tough to get everybody to do the HLR. It was tough to see who had done it. It was tough to see what the trend was, not because it was impossible, not because people didn't value it, but because we have project managers in 6 cities around the globe and one team sat in London trying to chase everybody up, which is difficult when it's midnight in Tokyo or whatever it is. And so having moved all of our project high-level reporting into the byBrick templates, we find we have an attractive, at-a-glance slide which we can export straight to PowerPoint if we wish, very easily giving us both trending over time on each week, giving us completion status, and giving us all of the open actions or decisions we've got, all the risks we need to manage, all the open and escalated issues. Again, absolutely standard stuff for a project report. Nothing particularly earth-shattering there, but by bringing it all into an online tool that they were able to edit and use very simply and straightforwardly with a minimum of training, we found that an enormous accelerator and a huge time saver for that community. Here's another view. This is heading into the EA space a little bit. Here are some products we're using. We've overlaid on a timeline there both their status in terms of support lifecycle and their standard status, so whether they are authorized for use or not. And we can see how those two things line up. And being able to see those two dimensions at once on the same graph is very useful for me in helping to make sure our technology is well monitored. That's really powerful again. And you can see there are a billion ways I can slice that, and trust me, I do. And I just wanted to close. I'm aware time's going on, and I'm very excited about this. Apologies for pushing the envelope a bit, guys. With some comments I gathered from the PMO, and I promise you, for all that's holy, I did not tell them what to say. They came out with these things themselves. And I'll let you read that, but essentially they're saying, because there were templates, but they were tailorable, they were accelerated, but they could make small changes to adapt to our environment. It gave us the ability to include everything key and roll it all up and consolidate and aggregate that information, which gave them great transparency over their project portfolio and let them prioritize their time. It gave them total traceability of the life cycle of a project from beginning to end, with audit trail, of course, because everybody loves an audit trail. And finally, well, not finally, semi-finally, they have all the functionality of a program management tool, like some of the more traditional, larger, fully integrated suites, but it didn't have the extended development timescales. I think it was probably 8 or 9 weeks from the time we finally signed the contract through till the time they were using it full-time for all project reporting, which for a multinational rollout of a significant change to their way of working was really, in my mind, quite impressive. And with no user resistance, I should add, it was the easiest rollout I've ever done. Finally, they said themselves, it lets them see which projects are touching specific technical solutions at any point in time. For me, that's a huge win, because I've just turned everybody in the PMO into an architect. So I've just got an extra 15 headcount or something for absolutely no headcount, which is great. And that's a force multiplier for me, and that's what makes my job doable. So that's the end of the tour I wanted to take you on. I'm aware we've only got a couple of minutes left. So I just wondered if we'd had any questions in from our attendees.
Okay. If you have any questions, please put them on the chat. Morten, I think you have something. I've collected one. So, how difficult has it been to get up and running?
Not at all, actually, not at all. I think, as I say, it was probably 8 weeks or something like that from first starting to having people using the tool in anger full time, and that has been remarkably smooth. It's not one of those rollouts where you have to spend your life persuading people and telling them how it's going to improve their lives. It's been really pretty straightforward. But obviously, as with any sort of semi-development environment, there have been things where we thought, oh, we didn't do that quite right. Maybe we could change that. But the help we've had, both from byBrick and from our own folks, in rationalizing various areas and streamlining it has been absolutely great. And it's been really easy to implement those changes. So we've had a really easy time. I'd love to give you a more interesting story of pain, but I'm afraid I don't have one.
There's a new one here around CIO onboarded question. So if CIO is onboarded, how has he been supporting the solution, onboarding the solution?
So how well did I meet my my stated criterion to delight the boss as well as delighting myself? I think, of course, we'd have to ask him to have his true opinion, but I think his perspective is pretty pragmatic, as you'd expect. He wanted to be able to have transparency, and we can give him transparency. We can show him what's going on. We can show him what's going on in a number of different directions and from a number of dimensions. We have that live. He can query it at any time. He has a login. He can use it anytime he wants. It's available anywhere he has a web browser. And that ability to just find out for himself rather than having to go through and ask a series of people, I think is extremely welcome to him. And in fact, the fact that he could do that probably means that he needs to do it less often because he has greater faith in the ability, in the information he's being offered, which has been really, really good. So I wouldn't necessarily describe him as a raving advocate of the tool because I don't think it enters into his day-to-day life that much. But he certainly sees that it has great value in delivering him the information he needs to do his job responsibly.
Final question.
There is one more I can see on the screen.
We have one here. One of our concerns are getting the EA tool too wide, ending up with the EA doing tool development for everyone else, leaving less time to EA. Did you have any concerns in this area?
Yes, and I think it's fair, isn't it, to say that very often one dreads getting a new tool in because one thinks one's going to have to add to one's headcount. For every single tool, you have to have exactly one administrator. In practice, what we found is that we're able to make the majority of small changes ourselves without adding to headcount. And that's been quite straightforward. For the larger developments, and we do have a roadmap for the tool as we continue to expand its use, but we've been using byBrick to do that, and they've been very straightforward. It really isn't the lengthy development cycle you might expect. It really, really isn't. The ability to use Business Architect, the desktop tool, to make those changes and verify them locally before you then upload and upgrade the database has been great for us. We are not seeing, huge waits of weeks for features to be implemented. It's usually days. We are seeing no loss of data. We're not seeing bugs coming in and making everything go wrong. And I think that's because you're using a proper modeling environment, actually, with a decent meta model built into it that lets you make those changes with very low risk of backward incompatibility or of ruining what you've done so far. It simply hasn't been a problem. The biggest problem we've probably had, and it isn't that big, is because you can put more on a screen, sometimes we do. And we had one or two screens where we had maybe 300 or 400 separate data items coming in and being aggregated. And perhaps those don't perform amazingly. And you might wait a few seconds for those screens to render. But again, wherever we've hit those, it's been very simple to go, hang on a minute, what is this screen for? What's the purpose of this visualization? And having asked ourselves that question, it has always been the case that we can say, well, 80% of this we can get rid of because it's not the core message.
Okay.
Thank you. I guess we are running out of time, so either you can mail us if you have more questions, but otherwise I guess I will say thank you to Mike for this very interesting session this afternoon. I think it was a really good story.
My pleasure. Thank you very much to everyone for coming along.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining the call.
Yeah. We are recording this session, so we will send you the link so you can look at it again or share it with colleagues. So yeah, thank you very much for watching.